You want to try to find people who have a similar addiction as you. And this can be challenging sometimes going into a 12-step room because I do think the reason I bring this up is I just got off a very interesting meeting and I wanted to immediately record a podcast to share this with people because I think it's a big issue when it comes to relapse. Everybody knows this, right? Peer support connection. All the research points to it being the most superior treatment method for sex and porn addiction. It's critical. As a person in recovery myself, I will tell you nothing did more for my recovery than connecting with other like-minded men like me, right? Who were also in recovery. It was without question the best. But again, there's a big difference between peer support and connection and going to a meeting, right? Going to a meeting, anyone can go to a meeting. Anyone can just sign on to the Zoom. Anyone can just drive over to the meeting, sit there, maybe you share for a few minutes, right? Anybody can really do that. And you can absolutely attend meetings without connecting. You can absolutely drive to a meeting. I've seen guys do this. They drive in, they sit there for the time, right? Maybe they share, maybe they don't. They get up, they get in their car, and they drive home. I'm always wondering, what are they coming here for, right? If they're not connecting, they're not using this as an introspective place to dive into the depths of their why behind their compulsive behavior. What are they doing, right? I always look at those guys. It's like, gosh, is he just coming here to tell his wife that he's going to a meeting, right? To satisfy his therapist? Or is he actually doing this to recover? So let's talk about these two things, right? So peer support and connection, what actually is it? Because again, guys are always so surprised when they relapse, but a lot of guys weren't actually getting peer support and connection. And then they relapsed, right? And they were confused, right? Oh, I'm going to these meetings. Well, where were you getting peer support and connection? So let's talk about this, right? The first thing that we need to talk about is process addiction. For those of you who have read my book or listened to my podcast before, you're familiar with this, but a 30-second recap. Process addiction is what sex and porn addiction is. It's how it's classified by the American Psychological Association, right? These are process addictions. What's a process addiction? Unlike a substance addiction where you're taking a pill, smoking something, drinking something, a process addiction, you're addicted to thought processes, right? Anorexia, bulimia, sex addiction, porn addiction, right? These are process addictions where the person's become addicted or compulsive around these thought processes. And the reason I bring this up is it's a pretty big deal when it comes to peer support, right? Because peer support connection, right? The reason that we don't send sex addicts to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings or Narcotics Anonymous meetings or to anorexia meetings, right? Despite all these people having addictions, peer support and that connection, really happens best when you're around people who have the same addiction that you have, right? Wouldn't you agree? Right? Being a sex addict and hanging out with a bunch of narcotics addicts or people with eating disorders might not be a super connecting experience, right? These people are addicted to something completely different, and impact on the marriage in other addictions is very, very different than the impact when you betray your wife sexually, right? So you might go to that meeting and not feel super connected. So the reason I bring this up is it kind of can happen within sex addiction, right? If you attend a meeting, there's two kind of poles to sex and porn addiction, right? There's the porn escape, kind of fantasy escape addict, right? So this person is typically a lot of pornography, but you could use other forms of sex as well. But it's to escape, it's to cope, right? It's to avoid these negative emotions, right? And then we have another flavor of addict, I guess. Most of the guys in my group kind of fall into this other category, which is rather than using sex and porn as an escape, they're using it as a means, right? So they like the attention, they like the validation, makes them feel special, makes them feel wanted. Sleeping with an attractive woman makes them feel, successful or more accomplished because, less successful men could not sleep with a woman that attractive, right? And so for those addicts, sometimes they're not even addicted. Sometimes they're more so compulsive than addicts, right? How do I say that? Because a lot of those guys, when they get caught, they stop. And they can stop, right? So are they technically an addict or is that person sexually compulsive, right? Or struggling with deceptive sexuality, right? Listen to other episodes if you want to talk about kind of some of the differences there. But my point of sharing this is when we're going to seek out peer support, you want to try to find people who have a similar addiction as you. And this can be challenging sometimes going into a 12-step room because I do think there's definitely a higher percentage of men who are struggling with more escapism and avoidance, using porn and fantasy to escape and avoid negative emotions, negative thoughts, negative aspects about their self-concept or their reality. I hate my life. I hate my job. I hate my boss, right? So there's a lot more escapism. And then there's more of the, what I call the use sex as a means, right? A means to enhance their life or a means to get something that they want. And so if you are attending a meeting and you're trying to find peer support, like-minded peers to connect with, sometimes these two people, it's difficult to relate. Often a lot of the people who fall into kind of this more escapism, they're triggered, right? They'll be triggered, and then the addictive thoughts and the addictive rituals will kind of start in the brain. Whereas the guys who are kind of more so sexually compulsive, right? The guys conquesting after women, affairs, sleeping with women on work trips, sugar babies when they get around to it. A lot of times these, again, like I said, when these guys get caught, they can stop. So if they're attending a meeting with somebody who's, truly what we would call a sex addict or a porn addict, somebody who can't stop, right? And they're very addicted to this behavior, and stopping is actually quite hard for them. It can kind of feel like the two almost have a different addiction. And through my eyes, they kind of do have a different addiction. Treatments are going to be different. The conversations with your therapist, navigating the betrayal is going to be quite different for these two people. Because again, somebody who's addicted versus somebody who's either sexually compulsive or engaging in deceptive sexuality, the reality is they are quite different. But I bring this up just to say, if you're trying to find like-minded guys to connect with, but the guys have kind of engaged in different sexual behaviors, it's often said that, because we're all engaging in sexually compulsive behavior, that we have something in common. And we do. But again, because it's a process addiction where the commonalities and the connection really happens is in the common thought processes. And because the two people kind of have very different thought processes that lead them to sexually acting out, to me, it can be sometimes hard to connect and relate in that moment. So I bring that up just to say, you can absolutely attend a meeting and find people there, and no one there really has a similar process that you have. And then all of a sudden you might not feel that connected. You might not feel like you can really relate to them. The second thing that I think guys really lack in a lot of peer support groups is group buy-in, right? So again, what the research says is peer support. It's not going to meetings. The research does not say going to meetings helps. The research says that peer support helps. So what's this look like? This would mean that the guys in your group are bought in to the specifics of your process addiction. Now, how do you do this? First, you need to figure out what the specifics of your process addiction are, right? So this is probably going to be done in either one-on-one with a therapist or going to an intensive where you actually dive for multiple days. You're actually diving into the details of your process addiction. So then once you have that data, you go back to your group and you kind of teach these guys about your specific process addiction. Now, this is not often done in 12-step groups. 12-step, the challenge that 12-step has is because there's no therapist or facilitator on site, there's no crosstalk allowed, and they have to do this because they want to make sure it's a safe place where you're not getting bad advice, basically. And so you're not going to hear a ton of kind of introspective process addiction talk only because we want to limit the crosstalk, right? Again, that's a challenge there because if the crosstalk and the kind of introspection around the details of your process addiction and the other guys in your group buying into it and helping you so that they can support you, that's a critical piece, I would say, right? Because what is recovery, right? Sobriety is stopping, right? So sobriety, that's kind of a different strategy, but recovery, right? We keep this from happening again. Long-term recovery, that's change. That's changing the brain. That's changing the way you think, right? It's changing the specifics of your process addiction. Okay, so getting your group to know what it is and helping them learn what to help you do, right? How to hold you accountable and how to call you out, right? I've had tons of guys in my groups. They'll call each other out, man. A guy will be on there and another guy in the group will say, hey, I don't know, man, know that you're not doing anything sexual, but that really seems like you're engaging in your process addiction, just not sexually. It's that education of you teaching your groups the ins and outs of your process addiction that allows them to do that, right? And that's what, to me, where peer support really comes in. If they don't know the ins and outs of your addiction and what your recovery work is specifically to you, right? And is it peer support? It's that deep buy-in of all these guys, really caring about you and your recovery that classifies as peer support, which drives connection too, right? Because now they're invested in your recovery and you're invested in theirs. And then that leads me to my last point, which is shame. If not probably the number one benefit from peer support, and the reason that addicts of all kinds are guided towards peer support groups, connection groups, is it's a massive shame reducer. And what we know about shame is shame blocks recovery. So if you feel ashamed of yourself, recovery is not possible, right? I'm not going to go into this. I have another episode on this, but there's tons of podcasts from other podcasts on this. But shame is an addiction recovery killer. It severs the brain's ability to recover. So you've got to get out of shame, and peer support's a great place to do that. Why? Because you feel like a normal dude. You don't feel like a freak. You don't feel like a weirdo, right? You feel like a person with a problem, just like everybody has problems, right? It just so happens that ours is sexual. But outside of that, you're no different than anybody else, right? We all struggle with stuff. We all have life experiences that cause us to do things. Some of those things hurt us and hurt others, right? So your group needs to be doing that. And I think one of the things that is really hard for me when I got into recovery was, gosh, it seemed like a lot of the groups just played a very somber track. Or was this very sad track, and it was just on freaking repeat forever and ever. And I think in the beginning, in the first 6 months, it was kind of therapeutic, actually. That sad, oh, hey, I can't believe we did this. Look at what we've done. Gosh, we're so screwed up. I think that was helpful in the beginning because I really needed to come to terms with the reality of what I had done and that it's not normal, it's not okay, it's not healthy. I really needed that. But after about 6 months, oh my gosh, it started driving me crazy. It's like, all right, hey, let's kind of transition into something a bit more positive, a bit more constructive. So I was attending these meetings over and over again. And it's not every single meeting. I traveled quite a bit. So I went to some meetings that I found tremendously helpful, super positive. So again, this isn't just a blanket 12-step statement. I'm more so saying if your group should have this very positive, uplifting, personal improvement, self-improvement energy to it, because recovery is self-improvement. It's what it is. I mean, you can't just sit around and talk about sex and porn forever. I mean, what is there really to talk about? Okay, we can talk about it for 2 or 3 weeks, but I mean, how do you talk about sex and porn for years? Eventually, we got to kind of just shift gears into what beliefs do I have about myself, about the world, about men, masculinity, about women, right? How the heck did all of this stuff happen? And those are details about your process addiction that I'm talking about, right? How did this happen? And then what do I need to do to change these things? For me, what a good peer support should be a bunch of guys who know the ins and outs of their process addiction, and they are talking about it in a positive, hey, I want to change way, rather than this shame-based. And again, I know I'm going to get a lot of crap for this. People hearing this are going to say, because I've been criticized as an anti-12-step person. I am not an anti-12-step person. I just believe that there's a lot of guys who only do 12-step for their peer support and connection. And it's not for that. You read the book, it's to work the 12 steps with other guys. That's what it's for. There's no crosstalk allowed. There's no therapist on site. It is a place to share your experiences with no crosstalk, and it's a place to work the 12 steps with other men and then with a sponsor. That's what it's for. Okay. So it's not designed for connection. It's not designed for peer support and accountability. It's not designed as an introspective container where you guys can really kind of go back and forth and make sure that you identify all of your process addictions and that you have people holding you accountable. It's just not designed for that. And again, it's not a criticism. It's just not how it's designed. So guys listening to this, I want you to come kind of take a look at your peer support and your connection and ask, is it peer support? Do I consider these men my peers, right? Are they like me? Do they know what it's like to be like me? And then the last thing I want to bring up is the whole step 12 concept, which is sponsorship, right? And I truly believe, the way the brain works, it changes the most when it sees a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Humans do this. Like, we're not wired to stop doing things. We're not wired to avoid bad things, right? Like, that's not what energizes us. That's not what motivates us. That's not what inspires us. We get inspired by becoming someone that we're really, really proud to become. And so that's where his whole step coming a sponsor and finding someone who, you really want to be like, right? I think the book describes it as you get a sponsor who has something that you want to have. I don't think this should just be limited to your sponsor. I think it should be your entire peer support group. These guys should be men that you admire, that you look up to, right? These should be men that when they're holding you accountable, when they're giving you some feedback, that you really value their feedback. My groups are made up of entrepreneurs, executives. And when an executive of one of the biggest companies in the world looks to you and says, hey, can I give you a piece of feedback on something that I used to do that I see you doing? That hits different, right? When that gentleman comes to you and gives you the feedback, it really hits. So my point is, make sure that your group and the people you're hanging around with inspire you to be better. Because again, that's what recovery is. Recovery is not about stopping the sexual practices. That's sobriety. Recovery is about changing the flawed thinking patterns, sense of self, testing your aspirations for accuracy. Are some of my goals and aspirations going to conflict with other goals of mine? But it's this introspective, this holistic introspective process that drives you towards long-term recovery. And here's the thing too, recovery should be fun. It really should be fun. If you are looking forward to a day where you don't have to do all of these things and you don't have to keep going to your group, you're in the wrong group and you're doing the wrong things. I mean, this should be a very positive experience, and this should be probably the beginning of a lot more introspective self-improvement activities that you're probably going to do for the rest of your life. I mean, every guy who gets out of my groups and graduates, this is not the end. They're typically going into another group. They're attending more intensives, right? This is the beginning of a really wonderful introspective journey for them, becoming the fullest man that they can be. Not just, for most of my guys, they've poured everything they had into their financial success and their career success or their businesses. But now it's like, okay, how do we pour into these other aspects? Money's great, but there's so many other things that are important in life. And how are those things doing for you? Feeling grounded, feeling at peace, leaving a legacy that matters, leaving a legacy that you're proud of. Right? To me, it's those aspects that really enable a guy to step into his integrity. And in my opinion, your group, peer support and a connection group should be facilitating that. That should really be the goal of everybody in the group, rather than sitting around and talking about what we've done and how we never want to go back there. Again, when we look at humans and human psychology, we're not really fueled by avoiding becoming someone bad. We're really fueled by becoming somebody that we really, like the idea of becoming. So, are you getting peer connection? Are you getting peer support? Do these men inspire you to be around? Is recovery fun? Are they bought into your specific process addiction? Are they holding you accountable? Are they calling you out when they see you kind of slipping back into old habits, right? All of these things, that's what you get from peer support and connection. So again, if you're not getting that, sometimes you don't even have to switch groups. Sometimes just go back to your group and say, guys, this is what I need. Can you guys do it? And I've had so many guys who go in and ask their group, and next thing you know, the group dynamics change. But you need it. You need it for your own recovery. And the married guys listening to this, you need this so that you don't freaking relapse and find yourself potentially divorced down the road, right? So advocate for yourself, advocate for a good recovery, advocate for deep connections with other like-minded men, advocate for peer support, and ask them to help you. Because the truth is, there's probably a lot of guys in your groups who want the same level of support and involvement.